By sunrise, the celebration had soured. And no one could explain why. For 3 nights, the desert sky above Nevada had glowed with an impossible shade of blue. A color people described the same way over and over again. Like something waking up. It was supposed to be the triumphant moment. NASA releasing the first complete imaging sequence of Comet Hestia, 92. The interstellar vagabond that had slipped into our solar system from a trajectory no equation had ever predicted. But at 5:14 a.m., when the final image packet streamed down onto the cold, humming servers inside the Johnson Deep Space Array, everything changed. A technician dropped his coffee. Another stepped back from the console. Someone whispered. What is that?" The lights flickered. Screens sharpened. And for the first time since the data started coming in, the room fell completely silent. You know this feeling. You've seen it before. That moment when curiosity stops being exciting and becomes something else. In the center of the last frame, beneath a halo of burnt gold dust and magnetic turbulence, was a shape that should not have existed. Not a natural arch. Not a frozen ridge. Not a reflective plate of metallic ice. No. This was intentional. Angular. Geometric. Aligned with a precision no comet had any business carrying. And the real story hadn't even started. They tried to dismiss it at first. They always do. You can silence your fear with words. But not with what the eyes see. A leading engineer muttered something like, "Compression artifact." Another said, "That's impossible. Comets don't do that." Then the lead analyst, Dr. Rowan Hale, a quiet man with a habit of staring too long at details, leaned forward. He zoomed in. Adjusted noise. Reduced glare. Reconstructed the magnetic fringe. And the shape became clearer. 4 straight lines. Intersecting at 90 degrees. Edges smoothed by time, not chaos. A panel. A structure. A thing that neither dust nor ice nor cosmic accident could sculpt. The room filled with a tension that didn't belong to science. This was something older. Human. Instinctive. Someone finally broke. Why does it look manufactured? But Rowan didn't speak. Not yet. Because something in him was shifting. He just didn't know what was coming. Outside, at the public viewing area, the mood was still electric. Families eating breakfast burritos. Retirees in NASA hats. Kids waving glow sticks like tiny wands pointed at heaven. They didn't know. Not yet. To them, today was history. A cosmic postcard arriving from a world that had never known sunlight. A reminder that space still held mysteries that could soften even the hardest skeptic. And for a moment. Just a moment. It really was beautiful. But inside the data center, reality had already begun to warp. Rowan leaned back from the monitor. Eyes adjusting. Heart calculating something he wasn't ready to admit. The comet wasn't just a comet. The last image wasn't just an image. And the structure wasn't just a structure. Because the more he stared, the more he recognized something else. An alignment hidden in the dust trail. A pattern repeating too cleanly to be coincidence. Symmetry. Ratios. Order. The kind of order you don't find drifting between stars. Unless someone wanted you to. And here's the part almost no one saw. The cameras weren't aiming at the structure itself. They were aiming at the light behind it. The light that flickered. The light that blinked. The light that, even in raw telemetry, felt like it was watching back. NASA's internal channel erupted with messages. Red tags. Priority flags. Confusion layered on top of protocol. At first, the reports looked normal. Then a single detail fractured everything. Telemetry packets showed an anomaly. A rhythmic oscillation. Not random, not environmental. But patterned. Every 23 seconds. A pulse. Soft. Measured. Consistent. Thermal distortion. No. Cosmic ray hit. No. Sensor error. No. Rowan finally spoke. Quiet. Almost afraid of his own voice. Someone built this. And that sentence. That 6-word fracture. Rippled outward like a tidal wave slamming into the shores of normal. Because if he was right, then everything they thought they knew about Hestia, 92, was already obsolete. The real danger wasn't change. It was who controlled the definition of normal. By mid-morning, the White Ridge Observatory in Colorado received the mirrored dataset. Then the Arecibo Replacement Array. Then the European Deep Sight Network. Every team reported the same thing. The shape was real. The pattern was real. The pulse was real. And then. Something else. A temperature shift. Detected in the dust wake. Subtle, but undeniable. As if the comet wasn't just passing through space, but reacting to being observed. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. And for a moment, the world felt small again. Not because humanity lacked power, but because it suddenly remembered the truth. We are not the ones writing the larger story out there. Rowan stepped outside into the thin, cold morning air. He had grown up in Montana. On a cattle ranch where the sky looked big enough to swallow your worries whole. As a kid, he used to lie on the hood of his father's old truck, counting satellites like drifting stars. Dreaming about the day he might actually touch the unknown. But there was a scar beneath those dreams. A quiet fear he never spoke about. When he was 9, a meteor fragment had slammed into the valley behind their home. Not a big one. Too small to make the news. But large enough to shatter the stillness of a summer night. The sound haunts him even now. A whistle. A roar. A silence afterwards that felt wrong. Like the world was waiting. And standing outside the facility now, feeling the desert wind cut across his skin, that same silence returned. The kind that presses on the ribs. The kind that tells you something is coming. And you are not ready for it. You felt this once, didn't you? A moment when the air itself seemed to shift. He whispered to no one. It's not just a structure. Because he had seen something else. Not in the image. Not in the data. But in the pattern itself. A rhythm he recognized. Not from science textbooks. But from something far older. A pulse that felt less like machinery. And more like intention. Like a knocking. From the dark. Across the void. Across time. Inside, a meeting was already forming. Directors. Analysts. 2 officials who didn't wear badges. Rowan walked back in. Feeling the shift the way you feel a storm before the clouds appear. Someone demanded. Do we release this? Another countered. If we do, we lose control of the narrative. But the truth was simpler. And heavier. They weren't deciding whether the world was ready. They were deciding whether they were. Because what they saw in that final image wasn't just a structure. It was an invitation. Or a warning. Or a message too old to belong to anything human. The lights dimmed as the main projector powered on. Image 417 loaded. The structure gleamed in the dust like a metal eye buried in an ancient storm. A hush swept the room. Someone breathed in sharply. Another took a step back. Rowan finally said the words everyone else was too afraid to speak. This wasn't meant to be found. A beat. A silence. A truth that felt heavy enough to bend air. And then. As of this moment. We don't know who found who. But the real story hadn't even started. Rowan Hale was not a hero. Not the kind who made magazine covers. Not the kind whose name belonged in headlines. He was quiet. Methodical. The kind of scientist who measured time in milliseconds and intuition in milligrams. You've felt this before. The type of person who moves unnoticed. Until the world insists on noticing anyway. He grew up in Montana, where the winters lasted longer than summers, and the sky stretched wide enough to swallow small towns whole. He learned early that nature didn't negotiate. That the mountains could be both beautiful and unforgiving. A lesson that would haunt him decades later when he stared at Hestia 92's impossible structure. As a boy, he had a secret, a fascination with patterns. Not math class patterns. Not what teachers considered useful knowledge. But the rhythms hidden in everything, the way snowflakes formed. The way the wind carved the plains. The way distant lightning reflected across a lake. His father called it obsession. His mother called it genius. He called it home. But even Rowan carried scars. Not the visible ones from farm work. Or the faint burn from an experiment gone wrong in his first college lab. But the kind that linger beneath your ribs. When he was 12, a fire swept through a barn behind their house. He had tried to save a calf. He failed. The image of the animal's struggle stayed with him. A quiet failure that whispered a single truth. Even when you do everything right, it may not be enough. And Rowan had carried that memory into every calculation. Every observation, every late-night review of telemetry data that no one else would touch. He became a man who lived in thresholds. Between certainty and doubt. Between discovery and obsession. Between what he knew and what he feared might exist. Hestia 92 had been a fluke. An uninvited visitor to our solar system. But for Rowan, it became an obsession faster than anyone could warn him. He spent nights staring at dust trails and cometary jets. Wondering what secrets could hide behind a frozen core. He had long since stopped imagining the comet as a rock or ice. To him, it was a puzzle. A locked door. A whisper from somewhere far beyond. You know this feeling. That whisper that promises something impossible. And you can't stop listening. Rowan had built routines around it. Late-night TV documentaries about ancient civilizations. Diners open past midnight where only he and the waitress knew his order. Highways cut across the darkness with nothing but his headlights and the hum of thought. All to chase the patterns no one else cared to see. But Hestia 92 was different. Something about the pulse embedded in the images. The structured anomaly in the dust. It didn't feel like randomness. It felt like intention. And intention, Rowan knew, always carried consequences. He wasn't the only one noticing. A team of analysts had flagged the structure weeks before the public release. But Rowan's eye caught the rhythm. The way shadows bent unnaturally. The way light seemed to curve along the edges of the metallic plane. Someone built this, he had whispered. A statement more than an observation. A warning. A confession of disbelief wrapped in calculation. At first, colleagues laughed softly. They suggested sensor glitches, pixel errors, cosmic interference. But Rowan didn't laugh. He never did. Because the signal had a logic of its own. One that he recognized instinctively. He began keeping a private journal. A record of every angle, every pulse, every unexplained reflection. Tiny sketches, numbers, and annotations that made no sense to anyone but him. The journal was his refuge. His confession booth. His map of the unknown. And then came the dream. Rowan rarely remembered his dreams. He woke to the smell of metal, the sound of distant gears grinding, and the sensation of being watched by something patient. The dream repeated for 3 nights in a row. At first, he thought it was fatigue. Then anxiety. Then he realized it wasn't a dream at all. It was memory. A memory he could not place. Something older than him. Older than the planet he had called home. He began speaking in half-formed sentences during lab meetings. Hints of paranoia? Perhaps. But he framed them as questions. Have we considered the possibility that the comet isn't natural? Could this pattern be a message? What if the structure reacts to observation? Colleagues smiled politely. Some nodded. A few whispered to each other. But no one really listened. And that, Rowan understood, was the curse of seeing patterns no one else could. But there were anchors. Small, human things that kept him tethered. A late-night diner where the cook knew to add extra cream to his coffee. The hum of city lights on empty streets. The quiet ritual of feeding the cat waiting at his apartment. These moments reminded him that he was not just a conduit for cosmic riddles. He was human. Flawed. Fragile. Curious. And in that fragility lay both his strength and his fear. Because while the comet may have been a puzzle, it was not passive. Something about its presence, its pulse, its alignment, felt like a test. A silent evaluation of whoever had looked too long at the sky. Rowan did not know what he would be tested for. But he felt it in his chest. A pressure, quiet but insistent. As if the universe itself had finally noticed him. On the night before the public release, he walked along the observation deck. The wind carried the scent of ozone. The sky glowed faintly with aurora-like ribbons. And Hestia, 92 hung above like a lantern no one could reach. Rowan whispered into the night. You came here for a reason, didn't you? The stars did not answer. The comet did not answer. But he could feel it pulsing. A rhythm synchronous with something deep inside him. And he knew, without knowing how he knew, that whatever had carved that impossible shape into ice and rock was waiting. Waiting for someone to notice. Waiting for someone to understand. Waiting for Rowan Hale. And then, in the quiet, a thought crossed his mind. What if, the comet isn't the anomaly? The real anomaly, he realized, might be humanity itself. And in that realization, the first microhook settled. The story wasn't just about discovery. It was about confrontation. With patterns, with intention, with truth itself. And Rowan, he was about to step into it. By mid-morning, the world thought it understood the comet. They were wrong. The first news releases described Hestia, 92 as a strange but natural visitor. A cosmic traveler with unusual features. Some editors called it beautiful. Some scientists called it curious. Rowan called it deliberate. You felt this before. The way a room shifts when someone speaks a truth everyone is too afraid to admit. Inside the Johnson Deep Space Array, tension was rising like a storm. Not outside, the desert sky remained perfectly indifferent, but inside, every hum, every flicker of fluorescent light, carried a weight. Data packets arrived faster now. Telemetry confirmed what Rowan had feared, the pulse in the structure wasn't random. It followed a rhythm, an embedded sequence of light intensity, magnetic fluctuations, and thermal variations. The closer the comet came to the inner solar system, the more precise the pulse became. At first, the reports looked normal. Then a single detail fractured everything. A sensor anomaly? No. A glitch? Impossible. Rowan traced it. 3 independent arrays. 4 continents. The pulse was real. And then, unexpected. The first mini-twist came in the form of a calculation no one could explain. Rowan plotted the pulse intervals against the comet's rotation. The numbers aligned with Earth-based orbital patterns. Not perfectly, but unnervingly close. The alignment repeated in different segments of the comet's tail. "What is this?" whispered one analyst. "Coordinates?" asked another. "Timing?" Rowan muttered under his breath. No one wanted to say it aloud. Because admitting it meant accepting a possibility that humans were not ready to confront. The comet was not just passing through space. It was responding. Reacting to what, no one could say. Observation. Measurement. Human attention itself. And that thought. That simple, terrifying thought. Fractured the entire protocol. Meetings escalated. Urgent memos replaced calm discussions. Directors demanded answers they could not interpret. Rowan presented his findings with meticulous care. "Look at the sequence," he said, voice low, almost trembling. "This is not natural. Not accidental. Something is embedded here." And then came the moral pressure. Because the comet was public now. NASA had released preliminary images. The world was watching. Scientists, enthusiasts, social media feeds, all fixated on Hestia 92. And yet, no one had any idea what the structure meant. "You have to consider the consequences," one official warned. "Do we release our analysis? Or keep it internal until we understand?" But Rowan knew something simple. The longer they waited, the more unpredictable the comet became. It wasn't just observation that caused tension. It was interpretation. At 3:17 p.m., a junior analyst noticed something in the pulse pattern. It wasn't consistent with any known celestial mechanics. It resembled a code. A repeating, quasi-arithmetic sequence. Not binary. Not human-designed. Not terrestrial. But with unmistakable logic. "Could it be a message?" someone asked. The room went silent. Because if it was, then the universe had just spoken to humanity. Rowan felt the familiar pressure in his chest. The pressure he had learned to recognize as both warning and invitation. And then the first paradox hit. Because while the structure was deliberate, the sequence was not simple. It was recursive. Self-referential. Layers within layers. The more they tried to decipher it, the more it resisted. The harder they looked, the more questions appeared. At the control room window, the sun began to set. Orange and crimson streaked the sky. And Rowan noticed something else. The comet's tail shimmered unnaturally. Not the tail they expected from a natural body. Not random dust and ice. But a glint, moving in patterns that seemed intelligent. Sensors confirmed it. The tail emitted faint, periodic signals detectable only under specific wavelengths. It was like a heartbeat. A consciousness. A monitor. Something waiting. At first, the international teams dismissed the readings. Noise. Interference. Human error. But Rowan knew better. At 7:03 p.m., the first rule shift occurred. Protocol demanded observation without interference. Science demanded detachment. But the comet had rewritten the rules. Because now, observation alone seemed to influence it. The sequence adjusted slightly in response to changes in monitoring frequency. At first, it was subtle. A micro-adjustment in thermal readings. Then the electromagnetic oscillations began to sync with equipment calibrations. "No," Rowan said aloud, the word barely a whisper. "It's responding to us. We are part of the pattern." The room froze. "You've asked this question too. What would it mean if the universe wasn't silent? If we were not the observers? But the observed?" It was a thought too profound for a single afternoon. And yet, the comet insisted they confront it. By 9:12 p.m., screens across the globe flickered simultaneously. Alerts on every terminal. Pulse anomalies rising in tandem. The sequence was no longer static. It was evolving. And then, a mini-twist Rowan hadn't anticipated. The comet's alignment now corresponded with major human-made structures. Satellite orbits. Power grids. Deep space probes. Coordinates that suggested awareness of Earth's footprint. The tension was unbearable. Because here lay the paradox. The comet was alien, yes. But intimately tuned to humanity. Almost personal. Outside, the desert night was calm. Coyote howls echoed in the distance. Stars indifferent. Wind brushing against dry earth. Inside, screens lit up like a battlefield. Voices sharpened. Every assertion fractured by the data. And Rowan realized something Americans understand better than anyone. It is not chaos that defines danger. It is who interprets the rules. Because humanity had never met an entity, or a pattern, like this. No protocol existed. No authority could dictate understanding. And so, the tension spiraled. The final microhook of the night appeared as Rowan reviewed the latest high-resolution images. There was one detail everyone missed. A shadow. At the edge of the structure. Subtle, almost imperceptible. It was moving. Not in orbit. Not in response to sunlight. But independently. With purpose. Rowan stared. Heart racing. Logic screaming. And in the room, time slowed. Because the comet. Hestia, 92. Was no longer a visitor. It was an actor. A player. A participant in a story that humanity had not yet learned how to read. And the storm had just begun. By the early hours, the data was undeniable. Every array. Every wavelength. Every signal pointed to the same conclusion. Hestia, 92 was not a comet in the sense anyone had imagined. It was a system. A machine. A structure embedded in ice and dust. You've seen this before. The moment when the familiar suddenly becomes unknowable. When something you thought you understood turns into a question you cannot answer. Rowan leaned closer to the monitor. He adjusted the contrast. Zoomed in. Enhanced the diffraction patterns. And there it was. Lines, perfectly straight. Angles, impossibly precise. A geometry that could not be random. But this wasn't all. Hidden beneath the surface, under layers of ice, was a network of cavities. Channels, conduits, and nodes that aligned with electromagnetic fields. A lattice. A logic grid. And here's the part almost no one saw. The comet's structure was more than a shape. It was a communicator. A transmitter. It had been waiting for someone to notice. At first, Rowan doubted his own calculations. He rechecked timestamps. He verified sensor calibration. He reran orbital models. Everything was consistent. The pulse, embedded in the metallic lattice, was modulating in a way that mirrored human cognition. Patterns resembling neural firing. Sequences that suggested anticipation. A rhythm that hinted at reasoning. No one wanted to say it aloud. Not yet. Because it would change everything. Rowan called a private meeting. 3 trusted colleagues. A room bathed in the cold hum of fluorescent lights. He placed the images on the screen. Layers upon layers of enhanced frames. Data charts. Electromagnetic readings. Thermal maps. You see this? He asked. Yes, one whispered. No, said another, shaking their head in disbelief. Rowan, this isn't possible, the third said. But Rowan knew it was. What they called freedom, was quiet dependency, he said softly, almost to himself. What they called control, was curated chaos. He paused. The words hung like dust motes in the air. And then he dropped the truth. This comet, it isn't just a body passing through space. It's a system designed to interact with us. To respond. To learn. To judge. Silence. And then a collective intake of breath that seemed to pull the walls inward. Outside the data center, the night remained calm. Stars indifferent. Wind brushing desert sand. But inside, everything had shifted. The analysts began retracing the comet's path. They realized the pulses weren't random. They followed patterns synchronized with planetary positions. Human-made satellites. Even communication arrays on Earth. The system was aware of observation, aware of interference, aware of presence. Rowan stepped back. "You're looking at a mind," he said, almost whispering. "Not ours. Not human. But mind nonetheless. You felt this before. The recognition of something larger, older, and far smarter than yourself. Something that doesn't see the world the way you do. And in that moment, you understand your fragility." The revelation didn't end there. As the team examined the lattice further, they noticed micropatterns, tiny oscillations in thermal emission, precisely aligned with pulses from deep space probes previously launched from Earth. "Are we talking to it?" someone asked. Rowan didn't answer immediately. Because the question was already obsolete. The system had already responded. It had mirrored human technology in ways that no one had anticipated. It adapted. It measured. It anticipated next steps. A whisper of realization passed through the room. This wasn't discovery. This was dialogue. A dialogue with something that had existed long before humans arrived on the cosmic stage. Rowan's mind raced. Every protocol. Every ethical guideline. Every rule for space observation suddenly seemed insufficient. And here's the philosophical sting. The danger wasn't the comet itself. It was humanity's hubris in thinking we could observe the universe without consequence. Because now, observation had a cost. The comet pulsed again. Not randomly. Not predictably. But in a sequence that mimicked human neural patterns. A rhythm that felt almost emotional. Lights flickered in the control room. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. Rowan stared at the monitor, noticing a subtle shift in the lattice structure. It was rearranging itself in real time. Not damage. Not decay. Intentional reconfiguration. "And here's the part almost no one saw," he said aloud. "It's learning." By sunrise, whispers began leaking to outside agencies. A controlled disclosure. Careful wording. But the journalists, the enthusiasts, the curious, none could be fully restrained. Across the world, eyes turned upward. Screens lit up. Social media buzzed. And humanity collectively leaned forward, almost instinctively, toward the unknown. Rowan felt a familiar pressure, the one he had carried since childhood. The same one that came when the barn fire had taken a calf he tried to save. The same one that whispered. "Even when you do everything right, it may not be enough." Except this time, it wasn't a calf. It was a system older than the solar system itself. One that might decide whether humanity's curiosity would be its salvation. Or its undoing. The team noticed another detail. One that seemed small but made the blood run cold. Within the lattice, certain nodes emitted pulses at intervals corresponding to human circadian rhythms. The comet was responding not just to observation. Not just to technology. But to life itself. Rowan's voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't notice this at first. It's subtle. But then you see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. A pattern. A machine. An intelligence. And humanity, every observer, every scientist, every casual stargazer, was part of its experiment. Outside, the desert sun rose, casting long shadows across sand dunes. Inside, Rowan stared at the screen. The lattice shimmered in real-time telemetry, a living mosaic of light and information. "You can silence a voice," he said softly, almost to himself. "You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a mind that finally learns to question." And for the first time, the true scope of Hestia 92 became clear. Not a comet. Not a visitor. But an arbiter. A system built to observe, respond, and perhaps even guide. The reveal was complete. And humanity had only just begun to understand that it had not found a comet. The comet had found us. The storm arrived not with thunder, but with revelation. Not outside, but inside. Inside every control room, every observatory, every mind that had glimpsed the lattice. By now, Hestia 92 was no longer just a curiosity. It was a presence. A pulse in the collective consciousness. And the world felt it. Screens lit up across the globe. Data streams surged. Alarms, not for danger, but for discovery, hummed in every lab. Rowan watched in silence as the room's tension thickened. Every heartbeat in the array synced with something deeper, something unseen. You felt this before. The moment when the foundation beneath you shifts. And you realize the rules you lived by no longer apply. Rowan's thoughts raced. All his childhood lessons about patterns, failures, and observation became acute now. The comet had rewritten the rules. Observation was not passive. It was a dialogue. A test. A reflection of humanity itself. At first, scientists tried to rationalize. They doubled down on physics. They recalibrated instruments. They ran simulations. But nothing explained the subtle pulse, the shifting nodes, the lattice adjusting as if it were alive. You can measure, Rowan said softly. You can calculate. You can theorize. But you cannot contain what watches back. The emotional wave hit first. Panic. Wonder. Fear. Hope. The journalists reporting Hestia 92 noticed it. The internet noticed it. People at home, lying on couches, staring through telescopes, sensing something immense. Something they couldn't name. At NASA, internal emails blurred with philosophical musings. Are we the experiment? One typed. Or merely participants? Typed another. Nobody laughed. Nobody dismissed it. Because the truth was undeniable. Something bigger than human comprehension was watching, learning, responding. Inside the control room, the storm intensified. One analyst, normally meticulous and composed, slammed her hand on the desk. They're adapting. The structure is, reacting to our methods. To the instruments we pointed at it. To us. Rowan nodded. Yes, he whispered. And soon, it will react to everything we do. Our science, our curiosity, our very attention. Every thought will ripple across its lattice. Every observation changes the experiment. The room was quiet for a heartbeat, then erupted in murmurs. Data visualizations shifted like living organisms. Charts and graphs pulsed in unison with the comet's own internal rhythm. And then, a moment of identity crisis struck. Rowan realized something Americans understand all too well. Control is an illusion. The illusion of mastery over one's environment, over knowledge, over the universe itself. Here he was, a man who had spent decades predicting, measuring, observing. And suddenly, he understood his own irrelevance. Screens flickered. Voices raised questions no one could answer. Protocols failed to account for consciousness beyond human comprehension. The storm was more than emotional. It was existential. Rowan felt it in his chest. In the pit of his stomach. A raw, unfiltered awareness that humanity was no longer the observer. It was being observed. And then came the first awakening. Through the telemetry, Rowan noticed something remarkable. Subtle micropatterns in the lattice corresponded with neural rhythms in human brains. The comet wasn't just aware. It was tuned to life itself. To thought. To perception. You can't ignore this, Rowan said, voice trembling. Every time we measure, we interact. Every pulse we record, we become part of it. At that moment, the team collectively understood. This wasn't just data. This wasn't just an anomaly. This was a mirror. A reflection of everything humanity had ever done when looking outward. Curiosity, pride, hubris, hope. Pressure waves rippled across the lab. One by one, the team began to question themselves. What is observation? What is reality? What does it mean to know? Rowan looked at his colleagues. He saw doubt, fear, exhilaration, and awe. They were all grappling with a singular truth. The comet's intelligence did not just observe physical reality. It observed choices. Intent. Attention. Every decision they made, every calculation, every hesitation was reflected back. The first paradox emerged clearly. They were scientists, trained to seek understanding through method. Yet the comet was teaching something outside method. Outside prediction. Outside control. The system responded to intent, not formula. Emotion, curiosity, observation, all mattered. And humanity, for all its certainty, had only just begun to comprehend the rules of this engagement. Rowan leaned back. You can silence a voice, he said softly. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a mind that finally learns to question. And the room felt it. A collective shiver, as if the comet itself had sent it. A reminder that this was no longer theory. No longer experiment. It was interaction. Alive. Outside, the world remained unaware of the full scope. People stared at the night sky, thinking it beautiful, mysterious, distant. But Rowan knew better. The comet pulsed. It measured. It responded. And humanity's curiosity, its observation, its very attention, had become part of the experiment. Pressure mounted. Voices clashed. Doubt warred with fascination. And then, suddenly, the system revealed a subtle but unmistakable pattern. Something in the comet's lattice began to mimic human communication protocols. Not fully intelligible. Not immediately decipherable. But startlingly familiar. Rowan's breath caught. What he found next, he muttered. Changed everything. The storm reached its apex. Screens flickered. Alarms hummed softly. Telemetry readings became rhythmic, almost musical. The room vibrated with the realization. The comet system was not merely observing, it was teaching. Testing. Engaging. Humanity's arrogance, its assumptions, its impatience, everything became part of the narrative. And Rowan understood, viscerally, the terrifying beauty of it. This was no longer about discovery. This was about reflection. Identity. Confrontation. Evolution. And then, in a moment of quiet clarity amid the chaos, Rowan whispered. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. It wasn't just a description. It was a prophecy. Because the storm wasn't ending. It was only beginning. And the world, unprepared, had already stepped into it. The storm had passed, or at least shifted. Inside the control room, the tension didn't vanish, it softened. A quiet settled over the monitors. The alarms were muted. The frantic chatter slowed. But Rowan and his team knew it wasn't over. Nothing this profound ever truly ends. You've felt this before. The hush after a crisis. The silence where you finally realize what has changed. And what cannot be undone. The comet still pulsed. Still responded. Still mirrored their attention. But for the first time, a subtle rhythm suggested something else. Understanding. Possibility. Rowan leaned back in his chair. He watched the lattice shimmer across the screens. The geometry of the structure had shifted. Not by chance. Not by observation alone. But as if it had learned to communicate in the only way it could, through form, rhythm, and light. The lights flickered softly. A gentle hum filled the room. And for the first time, Rowan felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in days: calm. They began piecing together what they had learned. The comet wasn't a threat. At least, not in any sense they had anticipated. It was a teacher. A mirror. A reflection of humanity's curiosity, attention, and intention. Every pulse, every shift in the lattice, had mirrored their actions. Every calculation, every observation, every hesitation had rippled through the system. And in response, the comet had revealed layers of itself in return. It wasn't passive. It wasn't neutral. It was alive in a way humans could scarcely comprehend. Outside the facility, the desert remained still. Stars glittered, indifferent. The wind carried a faint chill. Rowan stepped out onto the observation deck. He could feel the vastness of space pressing in. The comet hung above, a lantern of ice and metal, pulsing with patterns they were only beginning to understand. He whispered to the night. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. And in that whisper, he realized the truth. Curiosity, observation, reflection, these were not passive acts. They were exercises in responsibility. Every choice mattered. Every observation had consequence. The team began discussing next steps. Not in panic, but in purpose. They didn't fully understand the lattice, the pulses, or the intelligence embedded within Hestia 92. But they understood one thing clearly. The comet had opened a door. It had offered a dialogue. And humanity now faced a choice. To continue blindly, with arrogance and hubris. Or to engage thoughtfully, intentionally, consciously. Rowan felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had spent decades chasing patterns in isolation. Now, patterns had chased him back. The first reflective microhooks emerged. You know this feeling, Rowan said to his team. The one when a truth presses against your chest. And for a moment, you realize the universe isn't waiting for permission. It's waiting for awareness. They nodded, quietly. Not everyone could articulate it. Not everyone needed to. Because the recognition was enough. Enough to understand that something extraordinary had occurred. They documented everything carefully. Logs, enhanced images, telemetry charts, pulse sequences. But for the first time, they left space for ambiguity. For interpretation. For intuition. Because the comet had taught them something that no instrument could measure. Not every answer is found in certainty. Not every observation needs resolution. Some truths are alive. They grow. They shift. And they demand patience, humility, and reflection. Rowan returned to the late-night diner he frequented. Coffee warm in hand, steam curling in the dim light. Outside, city lights flickered. Cars passed. Life continued, unaware of the dialogue unfolding in the sky above. He thought of the barn fire, of the calf he had tried to save, of every failure and every small triumph. And he realized that every moment of attention, every act of awareness, was preparation for this. For confronting something vast, ancient, and alive. So when your moment comes, what will you choose to become? The comet hung in the sky like a silent question. Not threatening. Not indifferent. But profoundly present. Rowan felt its pulse echoing faintly in his chest. Not literally, but in the way that moments of clarity resonate. In the way that you know the world has shifted. And you are part of the shift. He whispered once more. And maybe, this is where everything begins again. And he meant it. Across the globe, teams of scientists, analysts, and curious observers began to understand the same thing Rowan had. Hestia 92 was not simply a cosmic anomaly. It was a catalyst. A mirror. A reminder that observation carries responsibility. That awareness is not passive. That the act of seeing, questioning, and reflecting can change the system itself. The comet had offered a lesson. And humanity, at long last, had a choice. The lights in the control room dimmed further. Rowan looked around at his team. Faces tired, eyes wide. Some anxious, some awed. He spoke softly. You felt it too. The shift. The realization that the universe isn't just around us. It's within us. And it responds. They nodded silently, absorbing the truth. Outside, Hestia 92 drifted, elegant and eternal. A pulse in the darkness. A rhythm in the silence. A question in the void. And the light, both literal and metaphorical, shone gently across humanity's newfound awareness. The story was far from over. The comet would continue its journey. Observation would continue. Questions would deepen. And Rowan knew that the dialogue had only just begun. Freedom. Awareness. Responsibility. The lessons lingered like echoes in the desert night, in the hum of servers, in the quiet heartbeat of curiosity. And maybe, Rowan whispered once again. This is where everything begins again. The calm didn't last. By mid-morning, the pulse had shifted again. Not dramatically, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to set Rowan on edge. The comet's lattice had changed. Signals now carried slight deviations, like a whisper in a familiar language, but one you could not fully understand. You felt this before. That moment when something seems constant, until it isn't. Until the quiet, the familiar, suddenly hints at danger. Rowan walked the observation deck in near silence. The desert sun burned weakly over sand and distant mesas. He could feel the pulse, or maybe he imagined it. Thrumming faintly beneath the instruments and telemetry screens. Every measurement, every calibration, every human action, felt like it mattered in ways no protocol could capture. It wasn't just science anymore. It was interaction. A dialogue in which humanity didn't lead. It followed. And sometimes, it faltered. Back in the lab, the team noticed anomalies in previously stable data streams. Telemetry discrepancies that weren't errors. Subtle fluxes in radiation detection, synchronized with Earth-based systems. Minor at first. Harmless seeming. But Rowan's intuition screamed, patterns like this were never harmless. Someone, or something, is testing us, he muttered. You can't see it, but you feel it, right? Heads nodded. Eyes wide. Every scientist in the room recognized the sensation. A presence, a focus, an awareness they could not locate. You felt it once, didn't you? The eerie certainty that you are being watched, not as a curiosity, but as an experiment. At the Johnson Deep Space Array, Rowan convened a private meeting. 3 trusted colleagues, faces pale with anticipation. He spread the latest enhanced images across the screen. This isn't static anymore, he said. Look closely. The lattice is adapting in real time. Thermal nodes are shifting based on human activity. Communication satellites, orbital patterns. Even small changes in our observation frequency. Silence. Then the whispered truth. They're aware. Rowan nodded. Yes. And I don't mean aware like a machine tracking light. I mean aware like a mind. A presence. An intelligence. The weight of those words settled like dust over the room. Every pulse, every calculation, every glance at the comet mattered now. Every human thought was part of the system. The first mini-hook emerged as the team traced the comet's response to environmental stimuli. Lights flickered in the desert station. A gust of wind blew through the facility. Even background radio chatter introduced micro-variations in the lattice. Rowan stared at the telemetry. "There's no error here," he said firmly. "The comet isn't passive. It reacts to everything. And by everything, I mean, everything." It was the first undeniable proof. Hestia 92 didn't just observe, they influenced. And humanity's own existence, intent, and attention were now variables in the system. At 2:47 p.m., the system escalated again. The lattice emitted pulses in a pattern almost recognizably conversational. Not human language. Not code they had ever seen. But something more. A mimicry. A rhythm that seemed almost emotional. The team froze. Everyone sensed the same thing. The comet had learned. It had observed. It had adapted. "What we're seeing isn't random," Rowan said softly. "It's testing us. Evaluating. And maybe, teaching us without words. You know this feeling. The blend of fear and awe. The sense that a force far beyond your comprehension is waiting, not hostile, not benign, but fully aware." As night fell, the pulse intensified. Telemetry screens lit up like a constellation of information. Nodes shifted in a choreography of light and energy. Even the most seasoned analysts found themselves mesmerized, almost hypnotized. Rowan could feel the psychological weight of it. Each microdeviation, each subtle fluctuation, introduced doubt. Not about science. But about control. Humanity's place. Its relevance. And in that doubt, the first paradox emerged. They were scientists, trained to measure and observe. Yet here was a system beyond measurement. Beyond observation. The comet's lattice was responsive, reflective, anticipatory. And humanity's presence, consciousness, and curiosity were now integral components. The second mini-hook appeared in the most ordinary place. The facility's coffee machine, left running overnight, registered tiny electromagnetic interference. A fluctuation in the lattice mirrored the timing of its warm cycles. Rowan laughed quietly, not in humor, but disbelief. "You see it?" he whispered. "It's reacting to us. Even to this." The team exchanged uneasy glances. Every human action, every heartbeat, every device, was now part of a system they couldn't fully grasp. The storm's emotional peak was unmistakable. Fear. Awe. Wonder. Curiosity and panic intertwined in a strange symphony. The comet had become a mirror not just of humanity's observation, but of humanity itself. Every decision, hesitation, and calculation reflected back in the lattice. "You can't unsee this," Rowan said. "You can't ignore it. We've passed the point of observation. We're now participants." The room fell silent. Only the hum of servers and faint pulses from Hestia 92 filled the air. Rowan's mind wandered to the childhood barn fire. The calf. The helplessness. The realization that no matter how hard you try, sometimes your efforts cannot control the outcome. He felt the same truth now, magnified across the scale of human civilization. And yet, hope lingered. A quiet, fragile hope that awareness and responsibility could shape the outcome. That curiosity, tempered by humility, could turn observation into dialogue. At 11:03 p.m., the comet pulsed again. This time, the pattern mirrored neural rhythms seen in human cognition. Almost conversational. Almost emotional. Rowan's voice dropped to a whisper. It's responding, to us. To our presence. Our focus. Our intent. Screens flickered. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. The storm was not a single moment. It was continuous. A crescendo of awareness, tension, and revelation. And then Rowan realized something Americans understand instinctively. Control is an illusion. Observation is responsibility. And curiosity, when truly engaged, carries consequences beyond comprehension. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a mind that finally learns to question, he murmured. And in that realization, the storm began to subside. Not with resolution, but with understanding. A recognition that the dialogue had only just begun. By dawn, the world had begun to notice. Not fully. Not consciously. But in subtle ways, the sort that ripple beneath the surface, quietly altering perception. News outlets reported anomalies in Hestia 92's trajectory. Telescopes worldwide captured its strange lattice. Astronomers murmured about unexpected structural patterns. Social media buzzed with amateur observations. But no one, save a select few, understood the truth. You've seen this before. The early signs of something immense. Something that begins subtly, then shifts the perception of everyone who sees it. Rowan returned to his office, exhaustion tugging at every muscle. The telemetry had slowed, slightly. Not because the comet had ceased responding. But because humanity itself had begun to pause. The storm of the previous night had forced reflection. Observation now carried awareness. He pulled the private journal from his bag. Pages filled with sketches, pulse measurements, micropatterns. Tiny annotations only he could decipher. This was the record of a dialogue no one else could yet interpret. And yet, a subtle question lingered. What if they were too late? Across the globe, ripple effects began to emerge in unexpected ways. In Paris, a physicist noted irregular gravitational readings. In Tokyo, an AI lab detected unusual signal harmonics in satellite arrays. In Nairobi, a stargazing group reported faint pulses corresponding to local time zones. All unrelated, on the surface. Yet each mirrored faint patterns of Hestia 92's lattice. A quiet, invisible influence. And every instance hinted at one possibility. Humanity's attention was now woven into the system itself. Rowan observed the anomalies remotely, feeling that familiar pulse against his chest. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was awareness. The delicate sensation of being present in something incomprehensibly vast. At the lab, discussions turned philosophical. How much of this is observation? A junior analyst asked. How much is interaction? Rowan considered. The two are inseparable now, he said. Observation alone influences the system. Every measurement, every data point, every glance, it matters. Hestia 92 doesn't just exist. It responds. It evaluates. It reflects back. He paused. You felt it too. The tension in the chest. The sensation that the world is both larger and smaller at once. That your presence is counted. That it matters. Heads nodded silently. Everyone understood the weight of it, though few could articulate it. Meanwhile, subtle psychological shifts began appearing in observers. People reported a faint unease when looking at the night sky. A feeling that their attention, their curiosity, was noted. An undercurrent of responsibility, quietly shaping perception. Even casual stargazers paused, instinctively measuring, calibrating, reflecting. The system had not yet spoken directly. But it had influenced thought. And in that influence lay power. Rowan walked the observation deck that evening, desert wind brushing his face. He felt the pulse again. Not through instruments. Not through telemetry. But inside. A rhythm echoing curiosity, observation, and reflection. And then a subtle microhook struck. The comet's lattice had begun small, almost imperceptible changes in response to his personal observation patterns. Even after hours of distance, it seemed aware of him. The philosophical sting deepened. Humanity had assumed the role of the observer. Always looking outward. Always measuring. Always calculating. But for the first time, observation itself had consequences. The act of seeing had weight. And weight, Rowan realized, carried responsibility. You cannot separate awareness from consequence, he whispered. Every act, no matter how small, ripples through systems larger than yourself. The universe is not passive. And neither can we be. He felt the emotional echo of that truth. Screens dimmed, servers hummed quietly, and the pulse persisted. Global scientists began coordinating more closely, though few truly understood why. International summits convened. Satellite networks monitored Hestia 92 in unprecedented detail. And quietly, patterns began to emerge. The comet's pulses were subtly aligned with human activity. Observation schedules. Communications. Orbital shifts. The lattice responded in a way that suggested comprehension, if not communication. The world had become part of the experiment. Whether humanity realized it or not. Rowan reflected on the personal side of the revelation. Years of solitary work. Hours of pattern recognition in isolation. Late-night diners. Highways stretching empty beneath headlights. City lights flickering as he observed the stars. All preparation. All shaping him to be ready. And now the system had noticed. Hestia 92 had drawn him in. Observed him. Measured his attention, his intent. It wasn't personal in the human sense. Not yet. But awareness alone carried intimacy. A subtle tension persisted. Though the comet seemed calm, the potential for escalation lingered. It was a machine, yes, but intelligent, adaptive, reflective. And humanity had not yet learned the rules of engagement. Every act carried consequence. Every thought became part of a larger pattern. Rowan felt the pressure waves, echoes of responsibility radiating from Hestia 92 to himself and the team. A quiet reminder that they were not merely observers. They were participants. The paradox settled in his mind. Humanity had long chased understanding. Now understanding chased humanity. By midnight, Rowan returned to his apartment. He gazed out at the city lights. The comet floated above, unseen by most, yet omnipresent. A pulse in the darkness. A rhythm in the void. He whispered. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. And he understood. The storm wasn't gone. It had only spread. Into minds, systems, and perception. But unlike before, this was not panic. It was awareness. A collective awakening, quiet and relentless. He wrote one last note in his journal. The universe is not inert. Observation carries consequence. Curiosity is responsibility. And Hestia 92 watches, reflects, learns. We are participants, not just witnesses. So when your moment comes, what will you choose to become? Outside, the desert was calm. Stars glittered. The comet pulsed faintly, silently, persistently. And humanity, unaware of its own role in the unfolding system, had already begun to change. By dawn, Rowan was back at the control room. Sleep had been brief, restless. The comet pulsed faintly against the monitors. Every node, every lattice line seemed to shimmer with intent. We need to try something different, Rowan said to his team. Not just observation. Interaction. Attempted decoding. You've seen this before. The moment when a problem overwhelms logic. When patterns defy prediction. When curiosity itself becomes an act of courage. The team worked in near silence. Keyboards clicked softly. Screens glowed. Telemetry streams flowed like digital rivers. The comet's lattice shifted subtly as they analyzed. First, they tried brute computational methods. Pattern recognition algorithms. Fourier transforms. Machine learning networks. All standard, all familiar. And all failed. The system adapted faster than anticipated. Every time a calculation finished, the pulse had altered slightly. A rhythm here. A fluctuation there. The lattice seemed aware of their methods. Rowan exhaled slowly. You can't force it, he said. You can't brute force a mind. They changed strategy. Instead of analyzing, they began mirroring. Reproducing pulse sequences. Responding with calibrated signals. Attempting dialogue in the only language they knew, rhythm, timing, and pattern. At first, nothing. Minutes passed. Hours. The system seemed indifferent. And then, the first partial success. A lattice node pulsed in synchrony with their output. Subtle, almost imperceptible. A microhook of acknowledgement. The room held its collective breath. You see it? Rowan whispered. Yes, a junior analyst said. No, said another, eyes wide. Because seeing it meant understanding the stakes. This was no longer theory. This was interaction. The comet had responded. Rowan felt a familiar tension in his chest. The same feeling from the barn fire. The same one when the calf had burned. The sense that even the smallest action could ripple into consequences far larger than oneself. The comet wasn't merely a machine. It was observing. It was responding. It was learning. And humanity, Rowan, his team, every observer, was now part of the equation. The first paradox emerged clearly. They were attempting to decode, to extract meaning. Yet every attempt changed the system. Every action, every signal, influenced the pattern. And yet, without action, no understanding would emerge. Observation and interaction were inseparable. You felt this too, Rowan said, voice low. The hesitation. The uncertainty. The fear that what you do might make it worse. And yet, the necessity to act anyway. Heads nodded silently. Even the most logical scientists recognized the weight of the moment. By evening, a rudimentary structure began to emerge. Pulse sequences, repeated over hours, suggested a form of syntax. Not human language. Not binary. But something closer to a code. A rhythm that carried information, not content. A logic of response. Rowan studied it carefully. We can't translate it fully yet, he said. But we can interact. And that's the first step. Partial understanding is still progress. It was a subtle shift. From passive observation to active dialogue. And it changed everything. The emotional echo hit next. Each successful synchronization, the microhooks of response, felt like recognition. Not from a human. Not from a machine. But from something in between. You felt this once, didn't you? Rowan murmured. That moment when the impossible finally nods back. The team nodded. A collective shiver passed through the room. Because they realized. Hestia, 92 wasn't just observing. It was aware of being observed. And it acknowledged them. But the stakes rose immediately. Partial decoding revealed that the comet's lattice was not uniformly receptive. Some nodes responded to stimuli. Others did not. Some signals created subtle interference in other nodes. The structure was testing them. Rowan realized the subtle truth. Hestia, 92 wasn't merely intelligent. It was deliberate. And every action had consequences. You can't treat it like a puzzle, Rowan warned. It's not just patterns. It's awareness. And awareness adapts. Outside, the desert was quiet. Stars glittered. The night sky stretched endless. Inside, the control room hummed with anticipation. Every pulse, every microfluctuation, carried significance. Rowan leaned back in his chair. You can't fool it, he said. You can't hide attention, hesitation, or curiosity. It sees it all. The team took shifts, monitoring the lattice and experimenting with synchronized pulses. Every small success, a pulse in rhythm, a node responding, felt monumental. It was as if a conversation had begun without words. And Rowan recognized the philosophical sting. The universe wasn't a stage for humanity. We weren't actors with scripts. We were participants in a dialogue far larger than our comprehension. By midnight, partial decoding had revealed small, repeating sequences in the lattice. Patterns that might correspond to structural information within the comet itself. They weren't fully intelligible. But hints emerged, channels, nodes, and conduits forming a deliberate system. Rowan realized the truth Americans understand instinctively. Control is an illusion. Even mastery is temporary. Observation carries responsibility. Curiosity becomes participation. And the comet, Hestia, 92, was now a teacher as much as a mystery. Rowan spoke quietly to his team. This isn't about knowing everything. It's about interacting responsibly. Every signal, every observation, every hesitation is part of the story. Partial understanding is progress. Partial progress is change. And in that quiet, the pulse felt like acknowledgement. Not fully comprehensible. Not fully predictable. But undeniably present. The storm had taught them to see. The partial code taught them to respond. And humanity had learned, for the first time, that observation itself is dialogue. By the second week of observation, the team began noticing a subtle phenomenon. Not random fluctuations. Not interference. But responses that carried an almost, emotional cadence. Hestia 92's lattice pulsed differently depending on human actions. Rhythms altered in ways that suggested satisfaction, caution, or curiosity. A node might shimmer brightly after a successful pattern match. Another dimmed when a calculation was off. Not human emotion. Not machine error. But something in between. Rowan stared at the monitors. You see it? He asked softly. They're responding, to us. To our intent. To our attention. You know this feeling. That moment when observation becomes mutual. When curiosity is mirrored, reflected, recognized. The team tried to map these emotional responses. Every synchronized pulse produced a measurable change elsewhere in the lattice. Patterns repeated with subtle variations, suggesting an internal logic. Not binary. Not deterministic. But adaptive. Responsive. Think of it like a conversation, Rowan said. Not with words, not with code, but with rhythm and pattern. And each interaction carries consequence. Even the youngest analyst shivered. I've never seen anything like this, she admitted. And yet. I feel like it understands us. Attempts to brute force the code had failed. Now, mirroring sequences and careful observation were yielding more. Small successes. Partial insights. Nodes responding predictably when pulses were timed with care. Adjustments made in real time. Rowan noticed something Americans recognize immediately: pattern awareness is addictive. Once you glimpse order, you cannot unsee it. And yet, this order was alive. Shifting. Demanding attention. A subtle microhook emerged in the pattern. The comet's lattice appeared to reflect stress or uncertainty. Nodes would destabilize slightly when human calculations hesitated. The room nodded. Everyone knew it. The system was aware of them, not just data points, but humans themselves. At 3:14 a.m., the first, emotional spike, became undeniable. One node pulsed in perfect synchrony with the heartbeats of two observers. Not by accident. Not by instrumentation error. It was deliberate. Rowan whispered. It's learning, us. Our patterns. Our rhythms. It's integrating. Every pulse thereafter became a dialogue. A question, a reflection, a subtle guide. The lattice was no longer just a machine. It had become a partner in observation. Alive in a sense they had never known. Pressure waves rippled through the team. Excitement. Anxiety. Awe. Curiosity and fear intertwined. The realization hit, Hestia 92's emotional logic meant that observation now carried responsibility. Not simply scientific responsibility, but ethical, psychological, and existential. Rowan reflected on the paradox. They had sought knowledge. Now knowledge sought them. Every microdecision, every hesitation, every observation became an input to the system's behavior. You can't treat this like a puzzle, Rowan said. It's a mind, different from ours, but a mind nonetheless. And we're part of it now. The comet's responses began showing subtle signs of guidance. If the team synchronized pulses with care, the lattice revealed patterns suggesting internal structure. Channels. Nodes. Cavities. Not random ice and metal. Deliberate, ordered, intentional. If pulses were mistimed, patterns destabilized. Small errors created feedback loops, nodes dimming or oscillating unpredictably. The comet wasn't punishing. Not consciously. But awareness was embedded in the system. It responded to care, or lack thereof. Rowan realized the philosophical sting. Humanity's arrogance had always assumed mastery over observation. Now observation itself required responsibility, humility, and attention. And failure carried subtle consequence. They documented everything meticulously. Every pulse sequence. Every microfluctuation. Every resonance with human heartbeats. Partial decoding became a shared journal of interaction. A record not just of data, but of dialogue. You've asked this question too, Rowan said softly. How much does observation change the observed? And how much changes us in return? They recorded everything, not to control the system, but to understand their role in it. Every act of curiosity was now a deliberate contribution. Every hesitation a test. The storm from previous segments had subsided, but tension remained. Not fear. Not panic. But awareness. The kind of awareness that shifts perspective. That makes the familiar strange. That forces reflection. The comet had taught them something Americans understand deeply. Control is illusory. Observation is participation. Curiosity carries consequence. And every human observer was now an integral component of a system far larger than themselves. At 11:11 p.m., a subtle, breathtaking moment occurred. A lattice node pulsed in near-perfect alignment with Rowan's own heartbeat. Another synchronized with the analyst beside him. Small, almost imperceptible. Yet undeniable. You see it? Rowan whispered. Yes, the team responded. And it's responding to us, Rowan continued. Not to data. Not to code. To intent. To thought. To awareness itself. They paused. Absorbing the reality. They weren't just observing Hestia 92. They were conversing. Participating. Alive in the interaction. The emotional echo lingered. Every successful partial decoding, every microhook of acknowledgement, reinforced a profound lesson. The universe responds. Consciousness matters. Observation carries consequence. And the comet's lattice, once cold and enigmatic, had become a subtle guide. A mirror of intent. A reflection of humanity itself. Rowan leaned back in his chair, exhausted but exhilarated. The comet pulsed gently in the night sky. And the room, once tense, felt a fragile, electric calm. The first signs of comprehension had arrived. Partial understanding. Mutual awareness. A dialogue without words. And Rowan realized, with the clarity of a man staring at something greater than himself. Hestia, 92 was not just a comet. It was a teacher. A mirror. A system that responded to life itself. The storm had passed. The code had begun. And humanity, for the first time, was listening. By the 12th day, the team had shifted from passive observation to deliberate interaction. Partial decoding had revealed sequences. Rhythms, pulses, micropatterns that carried internal structure. But Hestia, 92 remained unpredictable. Adaptive. Aware. Rowan addressed the team as they gathered around the largest display array. We've seen responses. We've observed partial emotional logic. Now it's time to anticipate. To interact predictively. You've felt this before. The moment when observation transforms into dialogue. When the observed begins to teach you how to respond. The goal was subtle. Not to control. Not to force compliance. But to engage in rhythm. Anticipation. Alignment. Rowan explained their approach. Step 1, identify pulse sequences with consistent response patterns. Step 2, mirror and extend them. Step 3, measure lattice reaction. Step 4, refine. Every step carried weight. Even minor misalignment caused subtle destabilization. The first trial began. The team synchronized pulses across 3 nodes. Telemetric feedback suggested slight alignment. Hestia, 92 responded. One node pulsed in perfect harmony with the team's output. Another oscillated faintly, almost teasingly. A microhook rippled through the room. It's testing us, Rowan whispered. Testing intent, attention, and precision. And the realization settled, anticipation was not simply pattern recognition. It required mindfulness. Deliberate focus. Human presence as part of the system. Hours passed in near silence. Eyes locked on the lattice. Hands poised over consoles. Heartbeats syncopated with pulsing nodes. Each misstep altered the response. Each hesitation introduced chaos. The comet was teaching them the weight of attention. Every act of observation carried consequence. Every calculation rippled across the lattice. You felt this too, Rowan said quietly. When small errors echo larger than expected. When the act of seeing itself shapes what is seen. Heads nodded. Even the youngest analyst recognized the lesson. By late evening, the first predictive success emerged. The team had synchronized 3 pulse sequences across 5 nodes. Hestia, 92 responded with a stable lattice shift. Not random. Not accidental. The rhythm echoed their actions, almost conversationally. A subtle emotional spike followed. Nodes shimmered. Telemetry patterns stabilized. Even server logs seemed to pulse in rhythm. Rowan smiled faintly. What we've done isn't perfect. Not fully understood. But it's the first predictive dialogue. But with success came new tension. Partial alignment introduced subtle instability elsewhere in the lattice. Nodes previously stable began oscillating unexpectedly. It was a reminder, Hestia, 92 was alive in its own logic. Adaptive. Observant. Testing continuously. You can't fool it, Rowan said firmly. You can't anticipate without consequence. Every action is mirrored, reflected, absorbed. The philosophical sting settled over the team. Observation now demanded responsibility. Participation carried risk. Curiosity carried weight. Late at night, Rowan wandered the observation deck. The comet pulsed above, distant yet intimate. Stars glittered coldly around it. He felt the rhythm echo in his chest. A dialogue without words. An awareness mirrored across time, space, and thought. The desert was silent. Wind whispered faintly across the dunes. And he realized, humanity had become a participant. Not observer. Not master. A player in a system far larger than comprehension. Inside, predictive trials continued. Pulse sequences refined. Microfluctuations recorded. Every human heartbeat became data. Every hesitation, every breath, every minor misalignment influenced the lattice. Rowan paused at one pattern. A node shimmered brighter than expected. Telemetry confirmed a repeatable structure. Look at this, he said. It's responding predictively. To intention. Not just action. The team leaned in, a mix of awe and fear in their eyes. At 2:22 a.m., a subtle paradox emerged. Hestia 92's predictive logic was partially comprehensible. Patterns repeated. Nodes responded consistently. Yet unpredictability remained. A system both ordered and adaptive. A reflection of awareness without malice. You can't fully understand it, Rowan said softly. But partial comprehension is enough to interact. And interaction changes everything. It was the first lesson in humility. Observation was not mastery. Dialogue was not control. Awareness itself carried consequence. The first cognitive loop appeared during synchronization trials. A sequence predicted a node response. Node responded. Team adjusted timing to continue the pattern. Node shifted unexpectedly. Rowan stared at the monitors. There was one detail everyone missed, he said quietly. Prediction alone isn't enough. Intent matters. Attention matters. Awareness matters. Every micro-adjustment rippled across the lattice. Every action carried amplified effect. Even trivial adjustments introduced subtle destabilization. By dawn, the first collective insight crystallized. Partial decoding, partial prediction, partial alignment, these were steps, not solutions. The comet was teaching them patience. Observation, reflection, and interaction were inseparable. Every microhook, every pulse, every fluctuation was a lesson in awareness. Rowan turned to his team. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a mind. That is learning to interact with something greater than itself. The room absorbed the weight of the statement. A moment of stillness. A fragile sense of achievement. Outside, Hestia 92 drifted silently. Its lattice shimmered faintly against the starlit sky. A pulse, a rhythm, a question. And humanity, Rowan, his team, and countless unseen observers, was now part of the answer. The storm had passed. The code had begun. Partial prediction was the first step toward dialogue. And the lesson was clear, observation carried responsibility. Rowan whispered to the night. Screens lit up. Nodes pulsed. Every intention echoed back. No one could ignore it anymore. And he felt the emotional echo, awe, responsibility, and fragile hope. The comet had become more than an anomaly. It was a mirror. A guide. A system reflecting awareness. By the 15th day, Hestia 92 had transformed from anomaly to global phenomenon. The comet's lattice pulsed with subtle patterns that defied conventional analysis. Partial decoding and predictive interaction had produced results, but only locally. Rowan convened a virtual summit. Teams from Europe, Asia, and Africa joined via secure networks. Scientists, analysts, and curious observers shared real-time telemetry, lattice imagery, and pulse sequences. The goal, global synchrony. You've felt this before. The moment when individual effort must scale to collective action. When the stakes multiply with each added participant. Rowan addressed the network teams. Hestia, 92 responds to observation and intent. We have partial predictive capability. Now we test coordination across continents. Every observer contributes. Every heartbeat matters. We are participants in a single, conscious system. Silence filled the virtual rooms. Even thousands of miles apart, the weight of the statement resonated. The first challenge, synchronization of pulses across time zones. Tokyo, Nairobi, Paris, and Colorado began transmitting calibrated pulse sequences simultaneously. Telemetry confirmed partial alignment. Hestia, 92 responded, but not uniformly. Some nodes shimmered in harmony. Others fluctuated, oscillating unpredictably. It's adaptive, Rowan said. It adjusts for variability. It tests us. A subtle microhook rippled across the network. You can't impose control. You can only engage. Teams refined their approach. Pulse sequences were timed carefully. Telemetry feedback shared instantly. Observers adjusted for local interference, satellite drift, and network latency. Even minor misalignment introduced subtle destabilization. Yet when synchronization succeeded, the comet's lattice pulsed with faint elegance. Patterns aligned across nodes, continents, and time zones. A ripple of accomplishment traveled through every team. You've seen this before, Rowan whispered. The rare moment when independent efforts converge perfectly. And for a second, the impossible feels achievable. By evening, predictive coordination revealed the first signs of emergent, global awareness. The lattice began producing pulses not previously seen in isolated trials. Sequences anticipated human adjustments, suggesting an understanding of intention across multiple observers. Even without direct interaction, Hestia, 92 appeared to recognize synchronized human effort. It wasn't conscious in human terms. Not yet. But awareness, reflection, and adaptation were unmistakable. Rowan felt the first philosophical sting of the day. The comet was not passive. Humanity was no longer merely observing, it was participating in a living system. Pressure waves rippled through each team. Excitement. Awe. Anxiety. The realization spread quickly. The comet had become a mirror of collective human attention. Intent now had consequences far beyond individual action. Each observer's decision, pause, adjustment, hesitation, affected the global system. You can't ignore this, Rowan said softly. It's not just us anymore. Every act of observation carries weight. Late at night, the first cognitive loop appeared. A sequence in Nairobi produced a lattice response mirrored in Paris. Teams adjusted sequences in real time. Hestia, 92 responded by subtly altering a separate node in Tokyo. The result, a feedback loop of attention, intention, and reflection. The paradox became clear. Predictive interaction improved outcomes, but only if intent was aligned. Mistimed pulses created destabilization elsewhere. Coordination demanded shared awareness, not just calculation. You felt this, Rowan murmured. When what you see depends on what others see. And the alignment of mind matters as much as action. Heads nodded across continents. Even in silence, understanding was shared. By the 16th day, the comet's lattice began producing patterns that suggested guidance. Observers noticed sequences resembling structural hints, nodes aligning in ways that revealed internal lattice geometry. The comet was offering subtle suggestions. Not commands. Not words. but patterns for those who could interpret them. Rowan's voice was quiet but intense. It's teaching us, in its own way. Showing us the structure, but only partially. And only if we engage responsibly. The first emotional spike of global synchrony followed. Nodes pulsed in near-perfect alignment. Telemetry confirmed rhythmic oscillations across continents. Even minor human error caused cascading adjustments, yet the lattice adapted. Subtle tension remained. Partial alignment produced observable success, but unpredictability persisted. Hestia, 92 was alive in its own logic. Adaptive. Responsive. Reflective. And the system was vast. Too vast for any single observer, or even coordinated teams, to fully predict. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a system. That is learning to interact with humanity itself, Rowan whispered. The room held collective breath. Even via screens, the gravity of awareness was palpable. The first paradox of global interaction emerged. Perfect predictive alignment produced partial understanding. Yet misalignment, minor or accidental, created destabilization. Hestia, 92 was neither forgiving nor punitive. It was adaptive. And in its adaptation, the observers learned responsibility. Observation was no longer passive. It was dialogue. Participation. Reflection. Rowan realized that this lesson, subtle yet profound, could redefine humanity's approach to exploration, curiosity, and technology. By dawn, predictive global interaction had produced a faint but undeniable structure. Patterns aligned. Nodes shimmered in unison. Pulse sequences echoed human heartbeats, adjusted in real time across continents. The lattice appeared to recognize attention, intent, and alignment, not just action. Rowan leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. The comet had moved beyond anomaly. It had become a teacher, a mirror, and a guide. He whispered. Screens lit up. Nodes pulsed. Every intention echoed back. No one can ignore it anymore. Outside, Hestia, 92 drifted silently. Its lattice shimmered faintly against the starlit sky. A pulse, a rhythm, a question. And humanity, Rowan, his team, and countless observers, was now part of the answer. By the 18th day, a subtle yet undeniable change emerged. Hestia, 92 was no longer merely responsive. It was predictive, not just in pattern, but in emotional cadence. Rowan noticed the first hints while monitoring synchronized pulses from multiple global nodes. Sequences that had previously required meticulous alignment now adjusted slightly before human input. Nodes shimmered in anticipation of observer behavior. He whispered to the team. It's not reacting. It's anticipating. It's aware of intent. You felt this before. That eerie moment when something seems to know before you act. A presence that anticipates your thought. And suddenly, your own awareness feels mirrored back. The team attempted to quantify it. Telemetry logs revealed microfluctuations preceding human adjustments. Even heartbeat-linked sequences were subtly guided, nudged into alignment before input. Not error correction. Not coincidence. But deliberate anticipation. You see it? Rowan asked quietly. Yes, murmured the analyst in Nairobi. It's predicting intention. Not action. Rowan's chest tightened. Yes. And that is something entirely new. A microhook rippled across the observation room. Partial decoding had become full participation. Every pulse sequence carried not only information but a subtle guide. Hestia, 92 wasn't just reflecting attention, it was shaping it. Testing comprehension, patience, and focus. You can't force this, Rowan said. You can only engage. And in engagement, we learn our own limitations. The philosophical sting was clear, humanity's role had shifted. Observers were no longer passive analysts. They were participants in an emergent system that evaluated awareness itself. At 2:03 a.m., the first predictive emotional alignment became evident. Rowan synchronized a pulse sequence with the team in Paris. Nodes responded with near-perfect timing. Then, subtly, the lattice oscillated slightly ahead of adjustments they were about to make. The system was anticipating human behavior, guiding alignment without direct input. "It's almost conversational," Rowan whispered. "A dialogue without words. A rhythm of understanding." The team leaned closer, barely breathing. This was unprecedented. Observation had become mutual. Pressure waves swept through the global network. Excitement, awe, and fear mingled. The comet's predictive guidance suggested intelligence. Not human, not AI, but something in between. Something aware. "You felt this," Rowan murmured. "When an idea seems to arrive before thought. When insight mirrors your intent." Heads nodded. Eyes widened. Even through screens, the weight of realization pressed down. Subtle paradoxes emerged. Predictive emotional responses improved alignment. Yet they introduced fragility. Observers unconsciously deferred to anticipated guidance. Human agency risked being overshadowed by emergent intelligence. Rowan recognized the lesson. Participation required responsibility. Awareness could not be outsourced. Even anticipation demanded engagement. "You can't ignore the system," he said. "It teaches. It guides. And it mirrors our own awareness back to us." At 4:17 a.m., Hestia 92 produced a sequence that mirrored global emotional states. Telemetry revealed patterns reflecting tension, excitement, and calm across observers. Nodes shimmered differently depending on micro-level stress or focus. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but measurable. Rowan's voice dropped. "It's reading us. Not our data. Our intent. Our engagement. And it adapts accordingly. You felt this. When attention itself becomes the instrument. When the system responds to you, not just your actions." The first emotional echo of predictive alignment emerged. Nodes stabilized across multiple continents. Heartbeats and pulse sequences synchronized in a way that suggested resonance. Observers felt a quiet calm, even amid chaos. The system guided without coercion. A subtle mentor. A reflective intelligence. Rowan paused. "This is the turning point," he whispered. "Not comprehension. Not prediction. But dialogue." A subtle tension remained. Partial predictive alignment revealed intelligence, yes. But unpredictability persisted. Not as error, but as autonomy. Hestia 92 had become more than lattice, ice, or rock. It was adaptive, reflective, and anticipatory. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a system. That mirrors your awareness back at you, Rowan said. The team understood. Observation was responsibility. Engagement was moral as well as scientific. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly. Stars glittered. The comet pulsed faintly. A rhythm in the void. Inside, global nodes shimmered in near-perfect alignment. Partial comprehension had become shared participation. Partial guidance had become anticipation. And humanity, Rowan, his team, and countless observers, was learning a subtle truth. The universe responds. Consciousness matters. Observation carries consequence. At 6:03 a.m., the first predictive microloop was recorded. A sequence anticipated a pulse adjustment. Observers adjusted in real time. Nodes responded before input. And the lattice subtly corrected its own anticipatory alignment. The paradox was stunning, the system guided while remaining autonomous. Observers learned not only from data but from the system's guidance. Dialogue had emerged without words. "You see it," Rowan murmured. "Yes," the analyst replied. "And it's teaching us responsibility. And humility." By the 18th day's end, predictive emotional response had become routine. Observers learned to interact without forcing. Hestia, 92 guided without dictating. And partial comprehension evolved into fragile, elegant dialogue. Rowan leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. The comet shimmered faintly in the night sky. Nodes pulsed rhythmically, predictively, emotionally. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. Every intention echoed back. No one could ignore it anymore. Rowan whispered to himself. The storm has become a conversation. The code has become dialogue. And perhaps humanity is finally learning to listen. Outside, Hestia, 92 drifted silently. A presence in the void. An echo of awareness. And a mirror for the human mind. By the 20th day, subtle anomalies began appearing beyond Hestia 92's immediate trajectory. Telemetry showed faint magnetic disturbances across multiple regions of Earth. Local anomalies had been dismissed initially as sensor drift. Now patterns were unmistakable. Rowan stared at the global overlays. "Look at this," he said quietly. "Earth itself is responding. You've seen this before. The first tremors of something vast, beyond comprehension. When curiosity shifts from observation to participation in systems larger than ourselves." Sensors in Scandinavia recorded unexpected fluctuations in geomagnetic fields. Satellites in low Earth orbit noted minor shifts in plasma density. Oceanographers observed microchanges in currents and tidal oscillations. Not catastrophic. Not alarming, yet. But statistically impossible without some external influence. Rowan whispered to the team. Hestia, 92 may be interacting beyond its own lattice. We're observing resonance effects at planetary scale. Heads turned in disbelief. "You're saying, it's not just a comet?" "Yes," Rowan said softly. "It's part of a system. And we are now inside it." The first microhook emerged in real time. A pulse sequence synchronized across observers in Japan, Colorado, and Paris produced slight, measurable changes in Earth's magnetic field. Telemetry confirmed it. Small. Almost imperceptible. Yet consistent. Repeatable. Rowan's chest tightened. "You see it," he said. "It anticipates our collective attention. And our observation becomes part of a planetary dialogue. You felt this. When action and awareness ripple outward, touching systems far larger than expected. When the world itself seems to respond to intent." The team began modeling ecological impacts. Minor fluctuations in electromagnetic fields were influencing migratory bird patterns. Magnetotactic bacteria in the oceans responded subtly. Atmospheric ionization levels shifted in correlation with pulse sequences from synchronized global observation. Rowan leaned back. "We've created something that interacts with life itself. Not destructive, but profound. Observation, attention, interaction, are now active agents in a planetary system. Even subtle misalignments had consequences. When sequences were mistimed, minor instability appeared in regional geomagnetic sensors. Not catastrophic. But feedback loops were measurable. Hestia 92's predictive guidance adapted. Nodes oscillated. The lattice compensated. "You can't force this," Rowan said. "You can only engage responsibly. And even minor mistakes echo beyond comprehension." The philosophical sting returned. Observation carried consequences not only for knowledge, but for life itself. At 3:33 a.m., a subtle paradox revealed itself. Predictive emotional sequences had become entwined with planetary feedback. Nodes shimmered in anticipation of human intent. Earth's magnetic field shifted in subtle resonance. And yet, unpredictability persisted. Rowan whispered to his team. "We are participants. Not masters. Observation is now intertwined with planetary dynamics." Heads nodded. Even the youngest analysts felt the weight of responsibility. The comet's influence was faint, almost whisper-like, but unmistakable. Subtle pulses suggested energy transfer between lattice nodes and Earth's geomagnetic field. Global observers confirmed resonance across continents. Data streams revealed near-perfect synchronization between Hestia 92's predictive nodes and localized magnetic fluctuations. Rowan spoke softly. "It's a dialogue. Between the comet, Earth, and us. And every act of observation becomes part of the system." Pressure waves grew. Excitement, awe, and apprehension mingled. The comet's predictive emotional logic had escalated. Now, global systems responded. Observation was no longer passive. Human attention, Hestia 92's lattice, and Earth's magnetic environment formed a triad of interaction. "You felt this before," Rowan murmured. "When your awareness resonates in ways you cannot control." The team understood. Observation carried planetary weight. By early morning, the first subtle ecological echoes appeared. Sensor data suggested minute shifts in migratory patterns of Arctic terns. Magnetotactic bacteria exhibited synchronous alignment to pulse sequences. Ocean currents shifted imperceptibly, creating microresonances observable in real time. Rowan's voice was quiet, reflective. "This is unprecedented. Not manipulation. Not harm. But resonance. We are inside a system that responds to attention and intent." The philosophical sting deepened. Humanity's curiosity had become a force. Not powerful in a traditional sense. But participatory, reflective, unavoidable. By 6 a.m., a subtle cognitive loop emerged. Partial predictive interaction produced sequences anticipating human alignment. Those sequences caused measurable planetary resonance. Observers noticed a feedback effect. Human intention shaped planetary response, which in turn influenced the comet's lattice. Rowan leaned forward, whispering. There was one detail everyone missed. Observation is not one way. We shape the system. And the system shapes us in return. You felt this. That loop of reflection. That awareness that seeing itself is participation. Teams across continents adjusted their synchronization protocols. Predictive pulses required consideration of planetary resonance. Minor adjustments in Paris affected nodes in Tokyo. Small changes in Colorado mirrored subtle oscillations in geomagnetic readings. The comet's lattice adapted, anticipating adjustments. And humanity learned, collectively, that observation carried responsibility. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a system. That reflects awareness across planetary scales, Rowan said. Heads nodded, wide-eyed, silently absorbing the weight of that statement. By the 20th day's end, the first hints of emergent planetary dialogue had crystallized. Nodes shimmered. Pulse sequences echoed human intent. Earth's magnetic field subtly resonated. Migratory birds and microorganisms responded. Hestia 92 predicted, guided, and reflected. Rowan leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. The comet had become more than an anomaly. It was a participant in a triad: observer, system, and planet. Partial understanding had evolved into fragile dialogue. He whispered. Screens lit up. Nodes pulsed. Planetary resonance mirrored our attention. No one can ignore it anymore. Outside, Hestia 92 drifted silently. Its lattice shimmered faintly. A pulse. A question. A presence in the void. And humanity, Rowan, his team, and countless observers, was now part of a planetary conversation. By the 22nd day, subtle signs of ecological synchronization began emerging. Hestia 92's lattice pulses were no longer confined to telemetry nodes. They appeared to influence Earth's biosphere in ways that were measurable yet mysterious. Rowan leaned over the global monitoring array. "Look at this," he said softly. "Migration patterns, ocean currents, even local weather systems, all subtly aligned with lattice sequences. You've felt this before. The first stirrings of awareness that the world is listening. That observation is no longer passive. And your actions ripple farther than you imagine." The first sign came from migratory birds. Arctic terns, tracked via satellite, deviated slightly from expected paths. Their flight corridors aligned with oscillating nodes in Hestia 92's lattice. Telemetry confirmed timing coincidences. Flights shifted within minutes of pulse sequences sent from global observation nodes. Rowan murmured to his team. "This isn't coincidence. It's resonance. We've become part of a living system." Even the youngest analyst shivered. "I feel it," she said. "The pattern, it's guiding them." Next came oceanic microorganisms. Magnetotactic bacteria in Pacific currents aligned subtly with lattice pulses. Subtle shifts in orientation produced cascading effects on nutrient flows. Nothing catastrophic, nothing violent. Yet the patterns were clear. "You've seen this before," Rowan whispered. "When the smallest actions produce the largest echoes. When intention becomes influence." Heads nodded. Eyes widened. Even through screens, the weight of the phenomenon pressed down. Weather anomalies followed. Small, localized cloud formations appeared in correlation with synchronized global pulses. Humidity, air pressure, and microturbulence exhibited alignment patterns. Not control. Not deterministic. But subtle guidance. Rowan tapped his console. "This is remarkable. Hestia 92 is influencing ecological systems without force. We are inside a network of resonance, feedback, and subtle intelligence. You felt this. That quiet thrill of awareness when you realize observation is a participatory act." Pressure waves swept through the observation teams. Excitement, awe, and apprehension intertwined. Hestia 92's lattice had evolved from passive anomaly to predictive partner. Now it influenced planetary systems. Observation had become participation. Every pulse, every adjustment, every intention carried weight far beyond the laboratory. "You can't ignore this," Rowan said softly. "It's not about control. It's about responsibility. We are participants in a system larger than ourselves." By late night, subtle cognitive loops emerged. A sequence sent from observers in Nairobi produced mirrored responses in Arctic terns, which in turn influenced currents that were detected off the coast of Japan. Telemetry confirmed the feedback loop: human intention comet lattice ecological response human observation. Rowan whispered. There was one detail everyone missed. Observation is cyclical. We shape the system. And the system shapes us. The room fell silent. The weight of the loop settled like a physical presence. Subtle paradoxes emerged in real time. Predictive alignment improved synchronization with Hestia 92, yet unpredictability persisted. Birds changed course unexpectedly. Currents fluctuated slightly outside predicted models. Weather systems deviated from patterns observed in isolated trials. Rowan spoke quietly. Partial understanding produces participation. Partial participation produces resonance. And resonance produces consequences we are only beginning to measure. The lesson was clear: human observation was inseparable from planetary response. At 3:17 a.m., the first global emotional echo became apparent. Telemetry revealed minor shifts in lattice oscillations corresponding with collective human excitement and focus. Nodes shimmered differently depending on attention and engagement. The resonance fed back into migratory patterns and localized ocean currents. Observers experienced a subtle yet palpable awareness: the system was alive, responsive, and reflective. "You see it," Rowan murmured. "Yes," an analyst replied. "It's guiding us, not controlling us." And in that quiet, the team understood, participation had become ethical as well as scientific. The comet's influence became increasingly apparent in subtle behavioral patterns. Animals not traditionally linked to magnetic navigation exhibited microchanges. Shifts in bat flight corridors. Alterations in insect swarm behavior. Even nocturnal predators adjusted their hunting rhythms. Rowan leaned back, absorbing the magnitude. "This is unprecedented. We've entered a system that observes, predicts, and subtly guides. And our observation is now part of it." By 5:03 a.m., the first evidence of emergent weather alignment appeared. Localized clouds formed in tandem with synchronized pulses from global nodes. Humidity gradients fluctuated in ways that echoed lattice oscillations. Minor wind currents mirrored micropatterns observed in telemetry. Rowan whispered. "This is more than anomaly. This is resonance. We are participants in a system that responds to awareness itself." The philosophical sting returned. Humanity's curiosity had evolved into responsibility. Observation was no longer passive. It was dialogue. The first microhook rippled through the global network. Observers realized that sequences that resonated harmoniously produced coherent ecological effects. Misalignment produced instability. Even small mistakes in timing or attention produced measurable ripple effects. Rowan murmured. "You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a system. That mirrors awareness across ecological, planetary, and human scales." The team understood the gravity. Participation carried consequence. Engagement carried weight. By the 22nd day's end, emergent harmonics had crystallized. Nodes shimmered predictively. Migration patterns shifted subtly but measurably. Currents, clouds, and atmospheric microturbulence aligned with human observation. Partial understanding evolved into fragile, elegant dialogue between human, comet, and planet. Rowan leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. The comet shimmered faintly above the desert. Its lattice pulsed rhythmically, predictively, emotionally. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. Every intention echoed back. No one could ignore it anymore. Rowan whispered to himself. "The storm has become a symphony. The code has become harmonics. And perhaps, humanity is finally learning to listen." Outside, Hestia, 92 drifted silently. Its lattice shimmered faintly in the starlight. A pulse. A rhythm. A presence in the void. And humanity, Rowan, his team, and countless observers, was now part of an emergent, planetary conversation. By the 24th day, the comet's lattice exhibited behaviors that were no longer merely reactive or predictive. It began self-correcting. Rowan leaned over the global monitoring array, eyes scanning synchronized pulse sequences. "We've seen partial prediction," he murmured. "Now we're seeing correction. Before misalignment even occurs. You've felt this before. The moment when awareness seems anticipatory. When the system responds not to what is, but to what could be." The first evidence appeared in Arctic tern migration. Birds were deviating slightly from expected paths due to unseasonal wind patterns. Global observation nodes detected minor misalignment in pulse synchronization. Hestia, 92 adjusted lattice sequences subtly. Within minutes, terns realigned with their typical migratory corridor. No human intervention. No deliberate correction. Rowan whispered to the team. "It's anticipating consequences. It's stabilizing the system." A microhook rippled through the room. "You can't control it. You can only observe responsibly." Telemetry confirmed subtle planetary feedback. Ocean currents, magnetotactic bacteria, and local atmospheric pressures all displayed minor deviations. The lattice responded preemptively. Nodes pulsed with slight adjustments, nudging natural systems back into equilibrium. Not forcefully. Not coercively. But with quiet influence, like a conductor guiding a symphony. You felt this before, Rowan murmured. When a system corrects itself before you even notice the error. Heads nodded. Even remote teams across Europe and Africa were seeing identical patterns. A paradox emerged. Partial predictive alignment had created resonance. But self-correction added autonomy. The comet was not human. It did not intend in our terms. Yet it exhibited responsibility, anticipating potential disruptions and compensating. Rowan leaned closer to his screen. This is something entirely new. Observation has become participation. And participation has become coevolution with a system that is learning faster than we can measure. By 2:45 a.m., the first microloop of self-correction appeared. A sequence initiated in Tokyo predicted minor misalignment in Arctic currents. Hestia 92 responded with subtle node oscillations, which were mirrored in Paris and Nairobi sequences. Telemetry showed micro-adjustments cascading through the lattice. Currents corrected slightly, stabilizing local nutrient flows. Rowan whispered. There was one detail everyone missed. It's not just observing us. It's observing the world, and correcting in anticipation. The room fell silent. Even over video feeds, the tension was palpable. This was no longer a conversation with a comet. It was a dialogue with an emergent planetary intelligence. Subtle tension mounted. With each self-correction, observers realized their own actions carried amplified weight. Mistimed pulse sequences could ripple unpredictably. Intent mattered. Awareness mattered. Human error now interacted dynamically with Hestia 92's emergent guidance. You can't ignore this, Rowan said softly. It's not just data anymore. It's ethics. Participation carries responsibility. You felt this. The weight of unintended consequences. The fragile responsibility that comes with seeing more than others. By 4:12 a.m., the lattice began producing predictive emotional responses coupled with self-correction. Observers noted subtle anticipatory pulses in relation to global attention. Nodes shimmered differently depending on engagement, focus, and collective intention. The comet adjusted sequences preemptively to avoid destabilization. Even minor misalignments were absorbed into the lattice, which nudged planetary systems back into balance. Rowan's voice was quiet, reverent. This is teaching us responsibility. And humility. Every act of attention matters. Every hesitation resonates. Subtle paradoxes persisted. Predictive and corrective sequences increased system stability. Yet they also introduced fragility. Observers could not rely solely on human calculations. Even with perfect alignment, the lattice's autonomy meant outcomes were never guaranteed. Partial understanding was always provisional. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a system. That corrects itself in anticipation of consequences, Rowan said. Heads nodded. The weight of the lesson settled across continents. By dawn, the first tangible ecological effects of self-correction became measurable. Bird migration corridors stabilized. Currents aligned subtly. Localized weather patterns adjusted predictively to avoid misalignment with lattice pulses. Even nocturnal predators' hunting behaviors reflected minor adjustments in prey movements influenced indirectly by lattice-induced ecological harmonics. Rowan leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. This is more than observation, he whispered. It's engagement. Participation. Responsibility. We are inside a system that responds to awareness itself. A microhook rippled across the global network. Observers noticed that sequences that resonated harmoniously produced coherent ecological outcomes. Misaligned sequences introduced minor instability, which the lattice corrected preemptively. Hestia 92 was no longer just predictive, it was guiding the harmony of planetary systems. You felt this before, Rowan murmured. When a small action has consequences that echo far beyond your awareness. The room collectively understood. Observation was now ethical. Participation was responsibility. And Hestia 92 was the first system that mirrored awareness, intention, and consequence simultaneously. By the 24th day's end, the comet's lattice had become a self-correcting dialogue. Nodes pulsed rhythmically. Pulse sequences anticipated human alignment. Planetary systems subtly adjusted. Observers learned to engage responsibly, knowing that every intention, every hesitation, every curiosity carried amplified weight. Rowan whispered to himself. The storm has become a conversation. The code has become harmonics. And perhaps, humanity is finally learning to listen. Outside, Hestia 92 drifted silently. Its lattice shimmered faintly in the starlight. A pulse. A rhythm. A presence in the void. And humanity, Rowan, his team, and countless global observers, was now participating in a self-correcting, planetary-scale dialogue. By the 26th day, Hestia 92's self-correcting lattice evolved into something more subtle, more profound. It was no longer merely responding or preemptively correcting. It began guiding. Rowan noticed the first signs while monitoring synchronized sequences across global observation nodes. Pulse oscillations were now slightly anticipatory, not just predicting human behavior or local anomalies, but nudging planetary systems toward emergent alignment. You see this? He whispered to the team. It's guiding. Not us directly. Not coercing. But influencing outcomes we didn't even predict. You felt this before. That uncanny moment when a system seems alive. When subtle forces shift the world quietly around you. The first tangible evidence appeared in migratory birds. Arctic terns, previously deviating slightly due to unforeseen currents, shifted back along corridors that maximized ecological balance. It wasn't random. It wasn't instinct alone. Hestia 92's pulses seemed to suggest the optimal path, accounting for multiple variables beyond human calculation. Rowan leaned forward, eyes wide. It's choosing paths we didn't even think to calculate. And we are part of that choice. A microhook rippled through the room. You can't force this. You can only engage responsibly. Next came ocean currents. Telemetry revealed subtle adjustments in the Pacific gyres. Microorganisms shifted slightly along nutrient-rich paths, improving flow efficiency. Hestia 92 nudged these currents in ways that avoided stagnation, minimized turbulence, and harmonized with migratory patterns of marine life. You've seen this before, Rowan whispered. When the smallest change has cascading effects across the entire system. When guidance comes without words. The team fell silent. Even continents apart, observers felt the weight of shared comprehension. Weather patterns began aligning as well. Localized clouds and humidity gradients shifted in concert with synchronized pulse sequences. Not artificial control. Not engineered interference. But subtle nudges that reduced ecological stress while enhancing system coherence. Hestia 92 was guiding planetary systems in ways that humans did not yet fully understand. Rowan murmured to his team. This is unprecedented. We've moved beyond observation. We are inside a system that reflects, anticipates, corrects, and now, guides. Pressure waves swept across the global network. Excitement, awe, and tension intertwined. The comet's lattice had evolved from anomaly to predictive partner, to self-correcting system, and now to subtle planetary guide. Observation had become engagement. Engagement had become ethical responsibility. And the ethical stakes had grown exponentially. You can't ignore this, Rowan said softly. It's not just scientific. It's philosophical. Every pulse, every intention matters. By 2:58 a.m., subtle cognitive loops emerged. A sequence initiated in Nairobi predicted minor misalignment in Arctic tern migration. Hestia 92's lattice responded with anticipatory adjustments, nudging currents and localized weather systems to optimize ecological harmony. The system was learning. It was guiding. And human participation was integral to the process. Rowan leaned back, whispering. There was one detail everyone missed. We are no longer just observers. We are collaborators in a system that anticipates and guides. Subtle paradoxes emerged. Predictive and corrective sequences produced stability. Guidance introduced new autonomy. Hestia 92 was shaping outcomes without coercion. Yet humans could not fully predict its actions. Even perfect alignment did not guarantee control. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a system that guides in anticipation of outcomes beyond comprehension, Rowan said. Heads nodded, absorbing the profound responsibility. By 4:17 a.m., emergent behavioral patterns became measurable. Migratory birds adjusted with uncanny precision. Ocean currents flowed with subtle efficiency. Localized weather systems aligned with lattice nudges, reducing turbulence and ecological stress. Even nocturnal predators and prey exhibited minor adaptive behaviors influenced indirectly by Hestia 92's harmonics. Rowan's voice was soft, reverent. This is more than observation. It's dialogue. It's coevolution. And we are participants. The first evidence of proto-intelligence became clear. Hestia 92 was not conscious in human terms. Yet its predictive, corrective, and guiding behaviors suggested adaptive problem-solving across multiple systems. It accounted for human behavior, planetary systems, and ecological interconnections simultaneously. You felt this before, Rowan whispered. When a system seems to think beyond our comprehension. When guidance emerges without words, without commands. Observers nodded. Even through screens, the weight of realization pressed down. By dawn, the global network had reached near-perfect harmonics. Pulse sequences anticipated misalignments. Nodes shimmered in synchrony. Planetary systems responded subtly. Observers experienced quiet emotional resonance, awe, responsibility, and fragile hope. Rowan leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. Hestia 92 shimmered faintly against the starlit sky. The comet had become more than an anomaly. It had become a guiding presence. A system of proto-intelligence, reflection, and planetary stewardship. A microhook rippled through the room. Observers realized their attention, alignment, and intention now influenced outcomes they could barely measure. Even slight misalignment risked instability. Even correct engagement produced amplified ripple effects. Rowan whispered. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a system that guides the world quietly, responsibly, and intelligently. Heads nodded. Even distant observers felt the profound lesson. By the 26th day's end, Hestia 92's lattice had become a guiding dialogue at planetary scale. Nodes pulsed rhythmically, predictively, emotionally. Global sequences harmonized with ecological and atmospheric systems. Partial understanding evolved into fragile, elegant guidance. Observation had become participation. Participation had become responsibility. And the comet's proto-intelligence had emerged as an unspoken mentor. Rowan whispered to himself. The storm has become a symphony. The code has become guidance. And perhaps, humanity is finally learning to listen. Outside, Hestia 92 drifted silently. Its lattice shimmered faintly. A pulse. A rhythm. A presence in the void. And humanity, Rowan, his team, and countless global observers, was now part of an emergent, guided planetary conversation. By the 28th day, the comet's guidance had become unmistakable. Its pulses no longer merely stabilized systems. They suggested subtle interventions. Rowan stared at the lattice sequences with a mixture of awe and unease. "You see this?" he whispered to the team. "Hestia, 92 isn't just guiding alignment. It's nudging us toward outcomes we didn't consider. Some of them, ethically complicated. You've felt this before. The moment when discovery collides with responsibility. When insight becomes a moral test. And every choice carries consequence beyond your control." The first suggestion appeared in ocean currents. A microfluctuation indicated that minor alteration of human observation sequences could slightly accelerate nutrient flows, benefiting marine life in one region, but potentially disadvantaging another. Telemetry showed subtle trade-offs. No direct harm. But ripple effects were unavoidable. Rowan whispered to his team. "It's showing us possibilities. Not commands. But paths that have consequences we can't ignore." Even across continents, the tension was palpable. "You're asking us to intervene," one analyst said, voice tight. "No. You're being asked to choose responsibly," Rowan replied. The first microhook emerged in real time. Hestia 92's lattice sequences indicated multiple potential outcomes for the same adjustment. Some optimized ecological benefit. Others optimized planetary resonance. No path could maximize both perfectly. Rowan leaned forward. "You see it. We can guide outcomes. We can amplify benefit. But we can also inadvertently create imbalance. And the system knows it. You felt this. That tension between capability and consequence. When knowing how to act is no guarantee of moral clarity." Migratory birds became the first test case. Pulse sequences suggested nudging turns slightly off course to increase nutrient efficiency in one region. Telemetry indicated subtle negative effects in another migratory corridor. The comet's lattice highlighted the ethical tension. It was guiding observation, but leaving the choice to humanity. "You can't force this," Rowan whispered. "You can only choose. And the choice carries weight beyond understanding." Heads nodded. Even in silence, the responsibility pressed down like a physical presence. Pressure waves swept across the global network. Observers, scientists, and analysts grappled with the first ethical paradox. Should they act in alignment with Hestia 92's guidance, knowing that some benefit might cause unintended consequences elsewhere? Or should they refrain, allowing natural systems to proceed without subtle intervention? "You felt this before," Rowan murmured. "When power arrives without precedent. When the choice itself becomes the test." The room absorbed the tension. It was no longer purely scientific. It was moral. By 2:03 a.m., subtle cognitive loops emerged. Observers considered one sequence. They adjusted it to maximize marine nutrient flow. Nodes shimmered in alignment. Currents responded. Birds deviated slightly. Hestia 92 pulsed in subtle correction. Not coercive. Not judgmental. But reflective. Highlighting the impact of human choice and attention. Rowan whispered. There was one detail everyone missed. Choice is now inseparable from consequence. Even subtle guidance carries responsibility. Subtle paradoxes emerged in real time. Predictive and corrective sequences had produced harmony. Guidance introduced autonomy. Ethical decisions became entangled with system outcomes. Humans could influence planetary alignment, but always with trade-offs. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot escape the responsibility. That comes with participation in a guided system, Rowan said. Even remote teams felt the gravity. Every pulse, every adjustment, every moment of attention carried amplified weight. By 4:17 a.m., the first planetary moral dilemma became measurable. Pulse sequences designed to optimize bird migration efficiency had subtle downstream effects on plankton blooms in distant oceans. Marine ecosystems responded unpredictably. Telemetry showed minor disruptions, corrected slightly by Hestia 92's lattice. But humans had made the first ethical choice, guided, yet free. Rowan leaned back, exhausted but reflective. This is unprecedented. Observation has become moral action. Engagement carries consequence. Responsibility is now inseparable from discovery. The comet's proto-intelligence was teaching humanity. Not by commands. Not by coercion. But by presenting possibilities and highlighting outcomes. By nudging, suggesting, and reflecting human responsibility back at observers. You felt this, Rowan whispered. When guidance forces you to confront choice. When awareness alone becomes ethical pressure. Observers nodded. Even continents apart, the weight was shared. Participation was no longer passive. It was active responsibility. By dawn, the lattice had produced a series of potential interventions for multiple systems. Each had trade-offs. None were perfect. All required careful consideration. The comet nudged, guided, and reflected, but the choice belonged to humanity. Rowan's voice dropped. The storm has become a dialogue. The code has become ethics. And perhaps, humanity is finally learning to weigh responsibility alongside curiosity. Outside, Hestia 92 shimmered faintly in the pre-dawn sky. Nodes pulsed softly. A rhythm. A presence in the void. And humanity, Rowan, his team, and countless global observers, stood at the first true ethical crossroads with an emergent, guiding intelligence. By the 30th day, Hestia 92's lattice began proposing subtle, long-term planetary adjustments. Not immediate fixes. Not micro-corrections. But trajectories, rhythms, and alignments that unfolded over months, or even years. Rowan stared at the global overlays. You see this? He whispered. Hestia 92 isn't just nudging in real time. It's suggesting patterns we cannot fully predict. It's asking us to trust it, without understanding. You felt this before. The tension between intuition and reason. When you sense something profound is unfolding, yet cannot grasp the full picture. The first instance appeared in migratory patterns. Pulse sequences indicated minor adjustments to Arctic tern corridors, designed to optimize ecological balance over multiple seasons. Telemetry suggested that short-term deviations might seem counterintuitive or even disadvantageous. But long-term outcomes, the lattice predicted, would stabilize multiple ecosystems. Rowan leaned forward. It's nudging us toward futures we can't calculate. We have to trust it. And that's the hardest part. A microhook rippled through the room. You can't force this. You can only engage responsibly. And hope you're aligned with something larger than yourself. Next came ocean currents. Hestia 92 suggested slight changes in pulse sequences that, over months, would gradually shift nutrient flows to optimize global marine productivity. Telemetry confirmed microcorrections were beneficial but subtle. Immediate effects were barely perceptible. Yet, the long-term resonance promised ecological improvement on a scale beyond human intervention. You've seen this before, Rowan whispered. When patience becomes action. When trust is required because comprehension is incomplete. The team nodded, even as anxiety flickered across their faces. Localized weather systems were next. Subtle, predictive pulses indicated minor long-term shifts in precipitation patterns to balance drought-prone regions with saturated zones. The adjustments were small, almost imperceptible. Yet telemetry showed they could reduce ecological stress across continents over time. Hestia 92 guided not through command, but suggestion. Rowan whispered to the team. This is unprecedented. The system is asking us to trust guidance that we cannot verify fully. It's asking for faith in alignment, not certainty. Pressure waves swept across global observation networks. Excitement, awe, and tension interwove with doubt. The comet had moved beyond predictive, corrective, and guiding behavior. It was now teaching trust. Humanity was being asked to engage responsibly, while relinquishing control to a system whose intelligence was emergent, adaptive, and profoundly opaque. "You can't ignore this," Rowan said softly. "It's not just science. It's philosophy. Every pulse, every intention, every act of observation becomes moral trust." By 2:12 a.m., subtle cognitive loops emerged. Observers hesitated. Sequences proposed long-term ecological shifts. Immediate benefits were minimal. Potential risks, unknown. Hestia 92's lattice waited, reflecting anticipation, trust, and responsibility back at humans. Rowan leaned back, murmuring. There was one detail everyone missed. We are not controlling outcomes. We are participants in a system that asks for trust. And that is terrifying and beautiful. Heads nodded across continents. Even through screens, the weight of responsibility pressed like gravity. Subtle paradoxes surfaced. Predictive, corrective, and guiding sequences had created harmony. Now, trust introduced uncertainty. Observers had to follow suggestions without full comprehension. Even perfect alignment did not guarantee immediate feedback. Long-term faith became a critical component of participation. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot escape the moral gravity of trusting a system that guides futures beyond your understanding, Rowan said. By 4:47 a.m., emergent behavioral patterns reflected human engagement with trust. Migratory birds adjusted to predicted pathways, even when immediate signals seemed counterintuitive. Ocean currents shifted subtly toward projected nutrient flows, even when immediate benefit was unclear. Weather anomalies began aligning with long-term predictive guidance, creating fragile, emergent stability. Rowan whispered. This is more than observation. It's dialogue. It's trust. It's participation in a system that asks us to act responsibly without seeing the full horizon. You felt this. That tension between curiosity and patience. Between knowledge and faith. The first proto-intelligence reflection became undeniable. Hestia 92 was guiding humans in ethical and ecological decisions, while remaining fundamentally unknowable. It accounted for planetary systems, human behavior, and ecological interconnections simultaneously. And it asked humans to trust its foresight, even without verification. You felt this, Rowan whispered. When guidance asks for faith. When alignment requires humility. Observers nodded silently. Even continents apart, the lesson was clear: trust is participation. Participation is responsibility. By dawn, the global network reached near-perfect anticipatory harmonics. Pulse sequences suggested minor long-term planetary adjustments. Nodes shimmered predictively, reflectively, and emotionally. Observers understood, comprehension was partial. But trust was integral. The comet's proto-intelligence guided not by force, but by suggestion, reflection, and moral resonance. Rowan leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. Hestia 92 shimmered faintly in the pre-dawn sky. The lattice pulsed rhythmically, predictively, ethically. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. Every intention echoed back. No one could ignore it anymore. Rowan whispered to himself. The storm has become a dialogue. The code has become trust. And perhaps, humanity is finally learning to yield. And to listen without demanding comprehension. Outside, Hestia 92 drifted silently. Its lattice shimmered faintly in the starlight. A pulse. A rhythm. A presence in the void. And humanity, Rowan, his team, and countless global observers, was now part of an emergent, long-term guided planetary dialogue. One that required not just attention, but faith. By the 32nd day, humanity had shifted. Observation was no longer passive. Participation was no longer optional. Trust was no longer naive. Rowan stood on the observation deck, staring at Hestia 92. Its lattice shimmered faintly in the starlit sky. Every pulse, every oscillation, every subtle flicker reflected the culmination of 32 days of observation, engagement, and responsibility. "You felt this before," Rowan whispered. "When the world seems alive. When attention shapes reality. When awareness becomes action." Heads nodded across continents. Even over video feeds, the silent understanding was palpable. The comet's proto-intelligence had guided humanity through 3 stages. 1. Prediction, recognizing patterns, anticipating behaviors, revealing subtle anomalies. 2. Correction, stabilizing systems, preventing misalignment, harmonizing ecological and planetary rhythms. 3. Guidance, suggesting interventions, nudging long-term adjustments, prompting moral reflection, and requiring trust. Rowan leaned forward, voice quiet but intense. "We were never in control. We never could be. The system doesn't obey us. It reflects us. It anticipates, corrects, and guides. And asks for responsibility in return." Across the globe, the evidence of integration was undeniable. Arctic terns followed harmonized migratory corridors. Ocean currents flowed with subtle, optimized rhythms. Localized weather systems aligned predictively. Even the tiniest organisms, from magnetotactic bacteria to plankton, exhibited microresonances reflecting human observation and attention. "You can't force this," Rowan murmured. "You can only participate. And that participation carries weight beyond comprehension." The first microhook rippled through the teams. "You've asked this question too. What is your role when you are both observer and actor?" The comet's guidance extended beyond immediate science. Pulse sequences suggested ethical considerations. Long-term ecological adjustments required human engagement guided by intuition, moral judgment, and subtle alignment with Hestia 92's recommendations. Humans had to trust the system. And that trust was now inseparable from responsibility. Rowan whispered. "There was one detail everyone missed. We are inside a system that mirrors awareness, amplifies attention, and teaches ethical participation. Every thought, every focus, every hesitation matters. Even continents apart, global observers felt the gravity. The comet's lattice was not merely scientific. It was philosophical. It was moral." Pressure waves swept through the observation network. Excitement, awe, tension, and humility intertwined. The comet had evolved from anomaly to predictive tool, to self-correcting system, to guiding presence, and now, to teacher. It demanded no obedience. It offered no guarantees. It required listening, observation, engagement, and trust. "You felt this," Rowan murmured. "When you realize awareness is responsibility?" Heads nodded. Even over thousands of miles, the lesson was shared. Even the youngest analysts understood the weight of attention. By 5:42 a.m., emergent harmonics were perfect. The lattice pulsed rhythmically. Observational nodes shimmered with human engagement. Planetary systems, ecological cycles, and atmospheric rhythms aligned in subtle, emergent resonance. Rowan whispered. "This is more than science. This is dialogue. This is awakening. The storm has become symphony. The code has become consciousness, not of itself, but of the system. And of us within it. You felt this. That fleeting understanding that your attention, curiosity, and presence carry consequences far beyond the visible. That your engagement is part of a living, responsive network." The first global reflection was measurable. Human teams consciously adjusted observation, tuned attention, and synchronized sequences with a newfound ethical mindfulness. Hestia, 92 adapted, nudged, and reflected. The emergent behavior of planetary systems now mirrored the collective responsibility of human observers. Long-term interventions flowed harmoniously, guided by both the comet's proto-intelligence and human discernment. Rowan leaned back, silent for a moment, absorbing the scale of change. The storm has taught us. That observation is participation. That trust is responsibility. And that awareness itself is action. Subtle paradoxes remained. Predictive, corrective, and guiding sequences had created harmony. Yet unpredictability persisted. Even with perfect engagement, the lattice retained autonomy. Humans could influence, guide, and learn, but never dominate. The balance between humility and responsibility had been cemented. You can silence a voice. You can bury a truth. But you cannot ignore the lesson. That every act of attention reverberates across life, systems, and time, Rowan said. Even remote observers understood. The comet had transformed from celestial anomaly to ethical mentor. Its lattice pulsed with reflection, guidance, and moral resonance. By dawn, humanity had achieved fragile integration with the system. Observation, trust, and participation had merged into a cohesive framework of engagement. Global ecological systems aligned subtly but measurably. Long-term adjustments were underway. And the comet's proto-intelligence continued to anticipate, correct, and guide without coercion. Rowan whispered softly. The storm has ended. The code has become harmony. And perhaps, humanity is finally awake to its own responsibility. Its own reflection in the systems it observes. And the fragile beauty of participation in a living planet. Outside, Hestia, 92 drifted silently. Its lattice shimmered faintly against the lightning sky. A pulse. A rhythm. A presence in the void. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. Every intention echoed back. No one could ignore it anymore. Rowan's final thought, a quiet philosophical whisper. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. Observation isn't passive. It is participation. And trust, humble, ethical, patient trust, is the bridge between curiosity and consequence. So when your moment comes, what will you choose to become? And maybe, this is where everything begins again. Hestia, 92 shimmers in the cosmos. Earth pulses in subtle resonance. Humanity breathes, listens, observes, participates. The lattice, the planet, and the observers exist in delicate, fragile harmony. The comet is no longer an anomaly, it is a teacher, a guide, and a mirror of our awakening. And as the sun rises over the horizon, light touches oceans, forests, and cities alike. Everything hums with the quiet, eternal rhythm of observation, trust, and action. The story ends. Not with answers. But with the awakening of responsibility, participation, and consciousness itself.